Prosseguindo com a nossa programação do dia, nós teremos agora a nossa segunda palestra. Se ontem nos agraciou com uma baita apresentação sobre por que nós precisamos de uma filosofia para um novo iluminismo e como os valores objetivistas têm muito relação com isso, nós agora temos a honra de apresentar novamente Aaron Smith, professor e pesquisador do Ayn Rand Institute.
Thank you. We have a little funny setup here. Can we move a few of these items? Can I give you this? And you might want to turn it off. Okay, thank you. In 1971, in her newsletter, The Objectivist, Ayn Rand wrote the following, quote, "I am not primarily an advocate of capitalism, but of egoism. I am not primarily an advocate of egoism, but of reason. If one recognizes the supremacy of reason and applies it consistently, all of the rest follows." Continuing the quote. This, the supremacy of reason, was, is, and will be the primary concern of my work and the essence of objectivism. Close quote. So why is that? Why is reason so central to objectivism? Why does Ayn Rand make a big deal out of reason? Why does she think it's the essence of objectivism? Why does she think it's so central to human life? Now, in this day and age, you might find it rather strange, as I do, to have to come up on stage and defend reason. After all, everything in this room, everything on you, everything in your pocket, everything in this building, everything in Sao Paulo, beyond the air we breathe, is man-made. The trees have been cultivated, they've been brought in from other areas, planted across the city. There are buildings, electrical lights, internet, including all the abstract knowledge required to build any of this, to make any of this possible. All of these are at the application of reason. So to come up on stage and say, we should follow reason, might seem a little strange. What else are you going to follow? Are you going to do a rain dance? Reason is your capacity to think. Follow your thinking. Follow your reason. This is how we got to where we are. This is how we have all these things around us. So it might seem obvious to say, yeah, follow reason. Sure, why not? But it isn't obvious. And there are billions of people on this planet who don't follow reason, who accept the validity of faith as some kind of supplement to reason or some sort of alternative way of reaching knowledge or truth. So it's something that has to be said. And we're often also told that there are truths that reason can't reach. There are truths that reason can't establish. And so you need faith as a kind of a supplement. Faith as a means to reach questions, say, about meaning in life or about God. And then we hear that, well, man can't live by reason alone because there's the whole emotional side of man. It seems that if man lives by reason alone, he'll be like that character on Star Trek, Spock, right? He's about being rational and logical, but he's of cold, unemotional, dispassionate, in the way of saying it's unpassionate. Is that what a life of reason looks like? So there is a question about what is reason? What does it mean to live by reason? And are there alternatives to knowledge other than reason? So what is reason, and why does objectivism give it such a central role? There's no space on this podium. And the first thing to say is that reason is the power of the mind to think, to grasp concepts, to form judgments by a process of logic. It is your capacity to know. And the reason why Ayn Rand gives such a central place to reason has to do with certain facts about human nature. These are facts that are not up to you. They're not open to your choice. They're simply facts of human nature, you like it or not. One is that reason is your means of knowledge. It's your only means of knowledge. I'll say more about that. But reason is your only means of knowledge. It's your means of identifying the properties of things, the characteristics that things have, grasping their causal relationships, learning what things are and what they can do, and what you can do with them. And as a result, if you think about the problem of survival, of human life, of human survival, what does it essentially require? It requires knowledge. You have to know what kinds of things that sustain and support and advance your life. You need to know how to go out and get them, how to achieve them, how to hang on to them. So it's your means of identifying the values that sustain and support your life. So as a result, reason is not just your means of knowledge. After all, who cares about knowledge? Knowledge is power. Knowledge is only important because it allows you to achieve values. It allows you to be successful in your actions in the world. So our view is that reason is your only means of knowledge. There's no substitute. And as a result, reason is your means of survival. But reason is also volitional. In other words, you have to choose to think. So thinking is not an automatic process. The connections of logic aren't made by instinct. It's not just a process that goes on in your brain while you're hanging around doing nothing. It's an active, effortful process that you have to choose to engage in, and in any moment of your life and in any issue, you can evade that effort. So these are metaphysical facts about human nature. They're facts about the nature of man. Reason is your means of knowledge. It's your means of survival. It functions by choice. So the guidance that's flowing out of these facts that you get from objectivism, well, the facts that you don't get from objectivism, the guidance from objectivism that you get that's flowing out of these facts is embrace your means of knowledge. Or you can put it in a different way, embrace your means of survival. So what does it mean to embrace reason? To embrace it as an absolute? It means following reason in every aspect of your life. It means never keeping reason on a leash, where you only let it go so far, and then when you reach a conclusion that makes you feel uncomfortable, you sort of yank it back, and you don't let it go there. And that's often what happens. Is that you think about maybe it's your job, maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's your family, and you start thinking about it, and you start having some negative conclusions about maybe some of your family, or some negative conclusions about your job performance or a relationship that you've been in for a long time or whatever, and you start to reach conclusions that make you uncomfortable, that maybe force a conflict with someone else or a person, and you just don't want to go there, and you will turn your mind away sometimes. People do this all the time. It's called evasion. I will not look at those facts, because then I'd have to do something. Then I'd have to make a choice. Then I'd have to face those facts. So this is another aspect of reason, is that you don't have to do it. It's like exercise. You can do it. You can go to the gym, or you can stay home. It's up to you. But it's the same thing with reason. They say man is the rational animal, but that doesn't mean that, and it's our distinctive characteristic as human beings, but that doesn't mean it's automatic. That doesn't mean we do it all the time. It certainly doesn't mean that. God, if we only did. So it's about never keeping reason on a leash. It's about following the facts wherever they lead, no matter what conclusions you reach. And it's about applying it to every aspect of your life. So this is not just for the scientist in the lab. It's for the moral philosopher. It's for thinking about what kind of a person you want to be, what kind of goals you want to aim at. It's your means of knowledge. And I don't separate out, there's knowledge on the one hand, and there are values on the other side. And values are subjective. They're just an issue of preference and so on. No, values are also an issue of knowledge. If you have an objective view of what values are, as Ayn Rand does, Her view is that values are not a strange, funny kind of fact. They're just regular old garden variety facts, evaluated in relationship to your choice to live. So when you're trying to think about, is something a value to me or a disvalue? Is something good for me, is something bad for me? This is a question of knowledge. It's a question of fact. You're trying to establish a relationship between some fact and your life and what it requires and what your needs are. That's how you determine what is good and what is bad, what is good and evil, what's for you and what's against you. So the question of knowledge is the question of values. Or the question of values is an issue of knowledge. Put it that way better. So she's saying embrace your means of survival. Embrace your means of knowledge. But what about faith? And what about emotions? Can either faith or emotion stand in for reason? Can they do the job that reason does? Or, which is more common, do they provide a supplement that reason can't provide? Do they give you access to certain kinds of facts that you couldn't get by reason? Well, let's start with faith. So what is faith? I mean, if you go to the Catholic Encyclopedia, you'll find 25 different definitions of faith, so it can be kind of confusing. I'm only using the term faith in an epistemological sense. In other words, faith as a means to reach knowledge, faith as a means of acquiring beliefs about what's true. So the way I put faith is believing in something in the absence of or in spite of evidence and proof. Because if you have evidence and you have proof, you don't need faith. You don't need faith that 2 + 2 is 4. You don't need faith that I'm on stage. These are things that you can either directly observe or you can establish as true. You can demonstrate them to be true. So in none of those areas do you need faith. So where do you need faith? In those areas where you want to believe something, but there isn't sufficient evidence to establish it, and there's no proof of it, and there's no evidence for it. But what's the problem with accepting something on faith? I mean, faith can't distinguish between the true and the false. This is what you need reason for. If I believe that there's one God on faith, and you believe that there are 12 on faith, which is right? Who's right? Which one? No. There's no way to settle that question. And any time you want to try to settle a question like that, I mean, theologians for a long time have tried to establish that there's only one God. God is the most perfect being. There can't be more than one perfect being, and so on, etc. I mean, they've tried to establish arguments to show that there must be one God or something. But what's going on there? Then you're bringing in reason. You're bringing in some kind of an argument. You're trying to establish the truth of, let's say there's one God or whatever. You're trying to establish that there's a God by bringing in some kind of argument. So reason always has to do the heavy lifting. Well, it does all the lifting. So the only thing faith is good for, if you want to use the term good, is to allow you to accept the truth of some idea, when reason says you have no reason to accept the truth of this idea. It allows you to get away with accepting things you want to believe when there isn't sufficient reason to believe it. And in that sense, it's a form of emotionalism. It's I want to believe it. When I used to teach philosophy in university, I really liked this university because we had a lot of first-generation immigrants to America. This was in Maryland. And so in every introduction to philosophy class that I would teach, say we had about maybe 50 students or something, we always, in every intro class, because these are usually the class where there are the most people, these aren't your philosophy majors, we would have Christians, Jews, and Muslims. And in every class, we would have at least some Hindus, and sometimes a few Buddhists, usually from Southeast Asia, Vietnam or something. And so I would devote the first 5 weeks of the course to discussing the issue of God. It's a useful and productive topic when dealing with philosophy, because God relates to religion, and religion gives you a kind of a worldview. It tells you what kind of a person you are, how you relate to the world, what kind of life you should lead, and so on. It gives you a kind of primitive philosophy. And it allows you to deal with metaphysical questions. What is the nature of the world? Is it the kind of thing that's created? Is there a supernatural dimension beyond this, or is it just nature? These are metaphysical questions, questions about the nature of the world we live in. It deals with epistemological questions, questions about knowledge. Is faith a legitimate means of knowledge? Is there such a thing as revelation? Is it just reason? Can you establish the existence of a God by reason and logic? And it deals with questions of morality. How should I live? Do I follow the 10 Commandments? What do I do? Do I live to please God? Do I pursue my own happiness? Is that contradictory to what God wants? Do I try to get to heaven? There's all sorts of questions that can be raised, and it's important. But what I liked about this class was the people in the class were coming from all different backgrounds. They weren't even all monotheists. And so when we talk about God, we were not talking about the same thing, and I think that's helpful. Because almost everyone, it's like 99% of people, accept whatever they're taken, accept whatever they're given. If they grew up in Texas, they'd be a Christian. If they grew up in Pakistan, they'd be Muslim. If they grew up in Vietnam, they'd be a Buddhist. That's what mommy was, that's what I am. And it's important for them to recognize this, that the religious beliefs that most people hold are not the products of their thinking. They're not the products of looking around at different perspectives and trying to think, which one of these is true? And what are the reasons why I think this is true? The religion I happen to be raised with is true. But the other ones, no, yours is false. Why do you think, do I have any Hindus in the room? How many Christians? It's okay to raise your hand now. Christian. So a question sometimes I would raise for my Christian students is, why are you not a Muslim? And there's literally no answer to that. I don't know. It's like, well, Jesus got the update from, right? So Jesus was a Jew, there's Judaism, and then Jesus got the update from God and gave the new message. But Muhammad got Windows 12, right, or Windows 20, right? He got the new update. So why didn't you just update the system? They're Muslims. I don't know, it's different. Yeah, it's different. Christianity is different from Judaism. Why aren't you a Jew? Well, I got the update. Why not the new one? What makes you think that Hinduism is wrong? Well, they've got a bunch of gods and stuff like that. That's crazy, right? Is that crazy? Why would it be crazy that there's more than one God? Well, Christianity, look, we've got our miracles. And the Hindus say we've got our miracles too. But their miracles are false. I mean, right? Obviously, right? Those didn't happen. There's no Vishnu, right? I mean, my view is, look, and what about the Greek gods? Anybody believe in the Greek gods? Zeus, Apollo, Athena? Yeah, me too. And it's like, well, that's silly, right? I mean, Apollo, he changes into a dolphin, and that's all not. Well, God can make a bush speak. Both of these things are impossible. Why are your impossibilities better than the Greeks? And there's no answer to these questions because they're not thought through. Why are they not thought through? Because I think there's a real kind of intellectual passivity that people take toward questions that relate to religion, that relate to what everybody believes, and they don't bring the critical eye of reason to these things and ask, are any of these things true? I mean, part of what philosophy teaches you to do is say, okay, so here I am, not my fault. I'm 16, 17, 20, whatever it is. I have certain kinds of beliefs. I have a stock of ideas, beliefs, values, whatever. Is any of this crap true? And that's a real question. I've been taught to value these kinds of things and to think these things are wrong and you can't have sex before marriage. I was just told all this sort of stuff. And I have to think, is any of this actually true? And what does it mean for it to be true? How do I reach the answers to questions of truth? And this is a philosophical kind of inquiry. And people don't take that kind of attitude toward a lot of things. It's not just religion, so you don't just have to pick on religion. But so much is accepted on faith, just on trust, because that's what I'm told, in a sort of unthinking manner. But if you want to take a more critical eye, if you want to take a more rational approach to your, let's say your religious beliefs or whatever, you should ask yourself carefully, is like, do I have actual reasons to think this stuff is true? So I tried to read the Bible. It's important. It's been very influential. And, you know, in Genesis, it's like this guy's like 800 years old and he has a baby, and the woman has a baby at like 750, and it's like, okay, well, like, how do you even get started with this stuff? This is not true. This is impossible. Like, how does anyone believe this stuff? And the answer is, well, you know, it comes from Revelation. The authors of these books are inspired by revelations. How do you know that? It says in the book. No, I'm asking you about the legitimacy of what's in the book. Because in the book it says, was inspired. It all comes from God, so it's got to be true. And I thought, man, when I write my next book, I'm going to put in one of the chapters, if anything else comes later to contradict this, it's false. And I will silence all my critics. So one of my students in that class came to office hours. And he came to ask me, I don't teach atheism in my classes. I teach them people to be more thoughtful about their views. I think they can probably sense where I stand on some of these issues. About halfway through the course, they start to get a sense. But one of my students came to office hours, and he says, oh, Professor Smith, so you talked about several arguments for the existence of God, and you kind of argued what was wrong with him and so on, but I've got another one. So he gives me another argument for the existence of God that he has heard, and I talk to him about what I think is problematic about the argument, why the argument doesn't work. So he gives me another one. So I got another one. So he gives me that one, and I do the same thing. And he starts to give me another one. I'm like, hang on, just let's stop for a second. So suppose you've got 17 arguments for the existence of God. And suppose I show you that none of them work. Would you give up your belief in God? And to his credit, he thought about it for a bit. He said, no, I don't think I would. And I said, that's important to know about yourself. It's important to know that your view, your belief in the existence of God is an issue of faith. Your belief in the existence of God does not stand or fall with the reasons or the evidence or the arguments that you're putting forward. So in effect, what we're actually engaged in is a pretense. This is a pretense that you and I are playing the same game. That both of us are being rational and logical. Both of us are being argument-based, evidence-based. Because if I show you all your arguments don't work, you'll still believe it. And I said, that's important because, this is another way of looking at faith. Faith is acceptance of something not on intellectual grounds, not on the grounds of evidence and argument, but on emotional grounds. It's something you want to hang on to. And I think that's important to realize that's what faith is. It's a form of emotionalism. I want to believe this, and I'll retain this belief. I'll make it impervious to reason, to evidence, to argument. I'll isolate it. I'll wall it off. I'll yank reason back when it starts to think about those things. I'll just hang on to it. was this that Peirce called this? The method of tenacity. I'm just going to hang on. And I told him, I said, you should think about this because is this a good way to hold on to ideas? Is this a good way to populate your mind with ideas? If what you're seeking and what you want and what you need in life is truth. I don't know whatever happened to that student. I never saw the person again. Hopefully it was helpful. I don't know, because I have nothing to hide here. Obviously I think it's a terrible way of trying to hang on to ideas. It, in effect, is, on these questions, I will throw away my mind. I will abandon my means of survival. I will abandon my means of knowledge. I will abandon my means of reaching truth, and just, God help me, hang on. But what that does is if you hang on to faith for that long, it allows you, what's the word? It institutionalizes a certain kind of method. If I want to hang on to it, that's what I'll do. I'll isolate some aspect of my belief system, my values, my beliefs about the world and stuff from reason and logic. And so if they ever come to questions about that or criticisms about that, I push them aside. These are facts I will not consider. And I think if you're on a genuine pursuit of truth, because after all, true ideas are the ones you need. True ideas are the ones consistent with the facts of reality. Those are the ones you need. And so you should be on a quest for truth. I think faith is a disaster. And in that respect, I think religion is and has always been the enemy of reason. There have been religious figures, there have been theologians who have tried to combine reason and faith. But this has always been one of two things. Either destructive to religion, because the more area you give of autonomy and authority to reason, the more it seems like you should be applying reason to those other questions you won't allow yourself to ask. And it also, if you give a realm to faith, well, these questions these are okay. This is the realm where I can use faith. Reason can't answer these kinds of questions, so I have a realm for faith. The more it leads you to think reason is not an absolute. I don't have to follow reason in every area of my life. Maybe there are other spheres of things where I can say, reason can't answer that, and I can just I can just wing it. I can just go with my feelings. And this is why you've had a centuries-long. Sorry, you got me on religion. It gets me animated. This is why there's been a centuries-long war of reason and science. This is why Galileo was imprisoned. This is why you have so much in the relation of heresy in relation to certain scientific conclusions that are being reached. Scientists are using methods of reason and logic and reaching conclusions that the church doesn't like or the religious authorities don't like. This is why you've had that conflict. So that's something about faith, and there's, of course, more to talk about. But let's ask the question about emotions, because there's this question of, suppose we abandon faith, suppose we accept reason as an absolute. What about the emotional side of man? What about that aspect of our existence? What about our passions? And here, unlike faith, emotions are good. Emotions are the form in which we experience our values. So when you experience something like joy, it's because you've achieved something important to you. You've obtained something that's really important to you. When you experience sorrow, it's because you've lost something that was important to you. If you experience fear, it's because you fear that something that you value is being threatened. So emotions are great, but they're not tools of knowledge. They're not means of identifying what's true and what's false. Why? Because emotions don't give you some special separate access to the truth. They simply follow from your judgments. Just to give a simple example, you're driving on the highway or on the interstate. Someone's driving very slowly in front of you, and you think, who is this jerk? I'm trying to get to work. The person is being just thoughtless or rude, right? These are judgments. And so you start to experience the feeling of like a frustration or anger or something. And then suppose you decide, I'm going to pass this guy. I'm going to pass this jerk and give him whatever, your rude look or whatever you do. And you discuss the person has been shot and they're injured and bleeding. what happens to your emotional response? Oh, it changes right away because your assessment of the facts is different. Your judgment of the facts and its relationship to you has changed now. Your judgments change, your emotional response change. I'm from California. We have earthquakes. So this sort of flooring system, when somebody walks through, it kind of feels like, I always thought it's a tremor. And then I realized, oh, that's not, and it's like, you know, it's like, should I get out of here? It's like, again, I have an emotional response, a little sense of nervousness. And then I realized, oh yeah, it's just this, the floor is kind of moving, and then my emotional response goes away. So your emotions follow from your judgments. So your emotions don't give you a special access to some sort of truth. They simply follow from your judgments. So they're only as good and only as appropriate as the judgments that they're based on. So then when you're trying to figure out what's true, you then can't just consult your emotions. You have to think, why do I feel what I feel? What are the judgments that are underlying those emotions? And are those true or are they false? Is it that I thought the person was a thoughtless jerk, or is it they're injured? Because you could be wrong about the facts, and you could be wrong about the relationship of those facts to you, and so your emotions might not fit the facts. They might not be appropriate to the situation. So faith can't determine what's true or false. So that's a dead end. Your emotions don't tell you anything separately from your own judgments, but your judgments are an issue of reason. So reason is not just one tool in the cognitive toolbox. It's the toolbox. It's your only means of knowledge. So Rand's view, so why is reason so important in objectivism? It's your only means of knowledge. It's your only means of identifying the values that sustain and enrich your life. And what can be more important than that? Thank you. And I think we have time for some questions.
Yes. A gente tem tempo para 5 minutos para fazer 2 perguntas aí. Então, quem quiser, já se posicionem.
Hi.
Hi.
Reason and art. Can you tell us anything about that?
Yes, but I'm not especially knowledgeable about art, but I'll say a few things. I think the production of art, I'll put it this way. Sorry, there's a lot of baggage. I'm trying to figure out how many steps back do I have to take. Art is often seen not as the province of reason, but the province of emotions. And that one gets in an emotional fury or frenzy and creates an artwork out of like inspiration. I think the actual process of creating art that's actually art is a process of thought. It's a process of thinking. It's a process of identifying what is the subject that I want to choose for this artwork? What are the means I want to use to create it? Art is a form of communication. What is it that I want to communicate? What is it that I want to convey? And what means do I need to use to properly convey that to an audience who doesn't know what my inner thoughts are? So how do I use that to communicate a theme or a message or something that I want to create? This is all a process of reason. And that's why one needs to know one's materials, what medium you're working in. Is it paint? Is it music? Is it whatever? There are a lot of questions about why we have the response to art that we do and so on. And I think some of this, I mean, from objectivist perspective, that's complicated, but read the Romantic Manifesto. It's Ayn Rand's book on philosophy of art, philosophy of literature and stuff. She has a lot to say about that. But I think it is, in the terms of the best art, it is a product of reason, which doesn't mean one's emotions don't play into it. Because one has a very personal, emotional response to art. I certainly have that kind of response to art. Most art leaves me cold. But some art, I have a strong response to it. I think because what it does is it taps in to my own estimate of the world and my own estimate of myself. And these are judgments as well. So it's like I hold a certain view of the world and I hold a view of myself in it. And art gives me an experience of this, such is life, such is the world. And my artistic response or my aesthetic response to this, or my emotional response to the art is this consistent with my view of the world. Is this what I think of the world? Is this what I think of man? Is this what I think of myself? And so there's a complex relationship, I think, between reason and the emotional response that we get to art. But that's a long topic, and we only have 2 questions, so.
Well, thank you, Mr. Smith, Professor Smith, for your thoughts on reason. Went really deep into my heart, especially because I consider myself a toddler on objectivism. So my question is like a follow-up question that I have made to Gloria. Well, yesterday I thought you were very pessimistic because, I mean, I thought, well, maybe the guy, even though the guy came from the land of the founding fathers and the place where where freedom was a social enterprise first, he came from California, where theft is legalized and we can be sent to jail for misgendering someone, which is, in my opinion, pathetic. Well, the question is, am I being naive for thinking that maybe we have a better path to reaching freedom than the battle of the ideas? Am I being naive for thinking that money is a much more objective subject for average people than objectivism itself? And am I being naive for thinking that maybe Bitcoin, which is a way that government has no power whatsoever for money, and it can be held in our pockets, is a better way than the battle of the ideas? Thank you.
There's no way of getting around the ideas. One can avoid them. One can turn to Bitcoin or money or some other issue, but ideas will always drive the issue. So if you try to advocate for freedom and you stay on the political level, it's useless. It's literally useless. I mean, if we had if you could imagine some ideal political candidate or party that was consistent with objectivism, even supposing you would agree with objectivism, it's like, and you think, oh, that is the party I'm going to devote my effort. I mean, you might devote some time to that, but nobody wants it. Nobody wants it because they don't value freedom, and they think that, you know, man should sacrifice for others. Man is his brother's keeper. What about the poor? What about the needy? What about the least? Blah 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 blah. We know all about that. So they won't want it. So there's no substitute. You have to get to the ideas or you're dead in the water. This is mission critical. This means for the project of freedom, if you don't teach the ideas, if you don't go to the issue, the philosophical level, it's the rocket doesn't come home. It doesn't come back to Earth. This is what it means. And so it's the most important thing you could possibly focus on, are the right philosophical ideas. Otherwise, it's all over.
Aaron.
Oh, we have one more question. I thought we had two. Go ahead.
Do you think that for reason to win the cultural battle, it is necessary to teach epistemology to teenagers, for example, to teach logic or concept formation? Thank you.
Yeah, I do think it's important to teach some aspects of epistemology, or in other words, just not as a subject exactly, but teach some aspects of, so wait, how does reason work? I had somebody in the hallway yesterday ask me, well, if somebody says, well, I used my reason and so I'm right, and what about that? And the answer is no, that's not the right way to think about it. If you use your conceptual faculty, if you use your faculty of reason, that doesn't guarantee that what you're going to reach is the truth. So you have to know something about the method of reason. How is it that reason can establish the truth of some view or some proposition or something? What do you need to do? I think most people just would not, I don't know. Like, how do you know I'm on stage? Well, I don't know, I can see him. How do I know Obamacare is good for the country? I don't know how I would, I'm not saying it is, but it's like, how do you establish the truth of a proposition? And what you need to do, and this is what studying something about logic. I don't mean formal systems, but you need to understand what does it mean to grasp the connection between some proposition and the evidence and the facts that support it. And you have to know something about what the process of reaching truth looks like, and a lot of examples so that they can see the connection between take something really abstract from Ayn Rand. Capitalism is the only moral social system. Well, that's a hell of a claim. And there's so many facts that would need to be brought forward in conclusions and stuff between that abstract proposition and some claim that it's actually true. You have to establish the connection. What are the facts that actually connect that claim with the observable facts that we can see around us? And that's a process of reason. And they have to learn that, so there's a method to this? So there's a way I can actually know what's true and know it not just a matter of like personal conviction, but I can show you that it's true. I can demonstrate the facts that support this, the truth of this conclusion. And if people knew that, they would know how to think. And they would be better able to process the news. They would be better able to adjudicate between some fact that's arbitrarily stated, some kind of, 9/11 was an inside job. They would be able to sort of like, okay, what are the facts that are being presented to me that establish the truth of this conclusion? And do they actually establish it? They would learn how to think. It's like in history, one historian says this and some other historian says that. It's important when you study history to learn what are the historical methods. Like I had a course in college, it was called Historical Evidence and Analysis. And it was a lot about looking at the actual methods that historians use to try to figure out whether some claim in the past is actually true. What does it look like to look at documents from the past? What does it look like to try to find eyewitness testimony, to cross-examine eyewitness testimony with other alleged eyewitness testimony? And it's a complex process. There's a lot you have to establish to try to figure out what's true. You can't say, well, I read it in the Bible. Or I read it in Tacitus. Does that mean it's true? Well, yeah, there's a lot of work that goes in there. So I think, yeah, some kind of age-appropriate level of this is what it looks like. And you take a court case. Jones was in Iowa at the same time that someone was murdered. He had access to a weapon, and you figure you're sitting on a jury. Like, what facts do I actually need to know whether this guy is guilty or not? And sometimes the answer might be, I don't have enough facts to know whether, but I need to know that. And I need to temper my judgment and say, there are reasons to think that he did it. But there are gaps in what we know, and there are some reasons to think he didn't. And you should apportion, or you should measure out, how much you believe in something, or how much you think something is true, according to the evidence that you have that supports it. But that's just a part of what it means to be objective in your thinking. So yeah, thanks. That was a good question.